Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Blame It on Marketing. And in this week's episode, we finally nailed down the CEO who understands marketing. He's like a rare creature. It's like going to the zoo and seeing some sort of endangered species. So, without further ado, Stuart, over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Stuart. Apparently, I'm the CEO who understands marketing. I was CEO of Clear Review, which was a B2B employee performance and engagement app, which we exited about 3 years ago now, I think, wasn't it? 2, 3 years ago. And I had the pleasure of working with Emma and Ruta, who worked as part of the marketing team there. Before that, I had a couple of other startups, and before that, I worked as an HR director in the music industry. So that's probably stories for another different podcast.
A personal statement podcast. Although, would you get in trouble? No, probably not anymore, right?
I possibly, I have had people contact me over the years looking for stories and journalists and things like that over time as things have come out. But luckily, there was nothing I had to hide from my time. All good fun, but a bit crazy.
So we talk about Clear Review on the podcast all the time, and we've had a bunch of Clear Review alumni also on. So we're really glad to have you here. You, as far as we know, and as far as I experienced when I started working at Clear Review, you built Clear Review with kind of marketing and especially organic in mind. How did that come about? How did you decide to do that?
I was thinking about this, and actually, being really honest, it came about because I hate two things that are often when business start they're used for lead generation. One, I hate networking events where you have to go along and not sell and just pretend to be interested in everyone else, and then one day you might get a sale or a referral back. And I also hate cold calling, which is another kind of often used technique when people are early stage and really need kind of leads. So I had a consulting company before Clear Review, my first business that I ran. And we started out, and I was doing some of those things, and I hated it, and I wasn't getting a huge amount of success. And this was like really early days of kind of digital marketing. So I bought a mailing list and sent out an email to, I don't know, 1,000 HR people offering services around performance management. And from that, probably got about 4 or 5 deals. So I was thinking, well, there's something in this. I've done one thing and I've got more work than I've done of going to like a year of networking events. So, and that, my kind of interest in marketing grew from that. So I started reading more about it. I read a book on SEO, and again, that was kind of in its nascent days, and kind of got involved in that. And because not a lot of people were doing it, and we ended up doing it, we started moving into outsourcing, and then we ended up being number one on Google for HR outsourcing, which meant we got a consistent flow of free leads. So from a company which was just me and my old boss in the Red Company days, we grew that, quite quickly into £1 million+ a year business, which was quite hard to do in consulting because it's not like recurring revenue, you're having to kind of generate it every year. So I think, again, marketing, the key for that for me was a consistent flow of leads, which leads to a consistent flow of revenue. So I learned from that in my first business. And then when I started Clear Review, it was pretty obvious that, well, that worked, let's do it again. And I think when you're building a tech business, you've got this zone of a year, possibly more, where you're developing the product. So what I did at Clear Review is we built the marketing, started the SEO, did a lot of content, a lot of articles, like a lot of thought leadership stuff while we were building the product. Yes, you had to have a website, so there was a lot of Photoshop involved because the product wasn't live yet. So then by the time that we actually were we had a product that was ready to sell and be used, we already had a consistent flow of leads coming in so that we could start demoing. So that's how I did it, and that's why I did it. And it was a really good idea because we were able to hit the ground running.
And till this day, like, people can't really compete with the website. Even now, like, we know of other clients that want to do like performance management software, and it's like, yeah, just don't bother. Like, pick some other keywords because it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And if you can own those earlier on, it's much harder. The amount of content and high quality stuff you need, it takes time to do, but once you've got that collateral, it can't be taken away very easily either.
Would you say you were confident in making that investment? Because I assume you were spending like a few grand a month probably for that first year on content? Would you say you were comfortable with that investment because you'd seen it work before?
Well, actually, no, I wasn't, I'll tell you why. Is I think when you're doing a startup and you've got very little money, and we were bootstrapped, so we didn't have any seed funding or anything like that, just the kind of money I took from my previous business. I actually did a lot of the marketing myself, so I didn't, I'd read books previously, and I'm kind of a bit techie, so I'd kind of set up. Not as well as you guys would have done, but enough to generate leads. So we had, when people would sign up, I had early drip feed campaigns, which I think I used some campaign manager software. So it wasn't all integrated into HubSpot or anything like that, but we did have a way of, when people signed up for the mailing list, they were getting a campaign of like 10 different emails, not particularly scientific, but enough to start generating interest. So I did a lot of that stuff myself. SEO I didn't, and I recognize that that actually is a particularly skilled thing to do, although you have to contribute to that in terms of writing high quality articles. So I engaged an SEO company and did spend that money earlier on. So probably wasn't as much as 3 or 4 thousand, but it was definitely over £1,000 a month on SEO, which I think a lot of people would be reluctant to do when you haven't even got a product. But I'd seen previously, when you get to number one on Google, the amount of leads that you get. I mean, I think you guys will know, you put in the figure, but the difference between first place and second place, what is it? Like 3 or 4 times
Like
as many leads.
90% and like 40% or
Yeah,
something.
it's something crazy. So
First.
if you can aim to get to that number one position for some good keywords, it's worth every single penny. It's just a leap of faith, I guess, for a lot of people to put their investment early on. But I'd already seen it work, and I already had the results previously. So I think there didn't have to be loads of money, because they're doing a lot of the kind of campaign ideas and the technicalities of it. And you're doing a lot of the content writing, which, to be honest, anyway. And all of the articles and things you're writing for SEO is great, because that's all collateral you can use for white papers and things like that. So it's work you should be doing anyway. You're just working with an agency to kind of make that more effective for SEO. So yeah, it was a no-brainer to put that kind of money in.
Yeah, I think what strikes me, Stuart, about the sort of story of like Clearview's marketing, if you like, is that there's an element of you definitely kind of understanding and trying to take that on, and also seeing some early success. But I think quite a lot of founders and other marketers listening in might be going, "Oh yeah, we're trying to do that, but we're a bit late in the day for doing it, because we've either got competitors in the space, or like, for example, we've just talked about Clearview. Like, it's quite difficult still for other performance management software to compete against Clearview, just because of how strong that presence is. So I guess, yeah, maybe what are some of the early mistakes that early stage startups make when it comes to kind of marketing that maybe you learned from yourself? Because
Yeah. Well, I think first thing is not to be put off that someone else is number 1, 2, 3, or 4 in big companies or on Google, because it isn't about how big your company is. It's about, there's probably lots of things, but certainly when I was doing it, it's the quality of your content and how much that is widely distributed by quality publications. So if you're writing really good stuff, and a lot of the big companies aren't, because they're outsourcing their SEO to some agency and it's not very high quality. So if you're the founder, you're the best person to write some really good high quality content, but then working with an agency that can make sure that that's used in the right way to help your SEO. So firstly, don't be put off by the competition, because you can displace them and it will take time, but we did and we got there. And I think secondly, don't leave it too late. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes I see companies make, that they put all the effort into the product, because most founders love the product. I love product. It's your baby. You want to nurture it, and you put all of your thinking, effort, and all your waking thoughts go into that product. And then until you finished it, you think, right, it's now ready for market. Let's take it to market, without realizing that it's going to take a year to start getting some marketing momentum. So then you end up in this really difficult situation where you've got to get leads in, because your runway of financial runway is short. And then you have to then make the expensive option of pay-per-click, which I've never found to be successful, or going to those expensive dating events where you're paying 15 grand to meet 5 people. And yes, that can work, but it's a pretty risky activity. And again, those tend to work for the bigger deals, which take time to come to fruition. So guess what? People run out of runway and they run out of money. So they leave it too late. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. And I think the last thing I would say is that when people do that early investment in marketing, and particularly where they say it's just not working, is when they're focusing their marketing on the product features and what it does. There's the dog we talked about. On the product features and not on the why behind it. I was talking, a friend phoned me the other day and said, I want to kind of kind of market my business in a different way, and he showed me his website, and it all talked about what he did, but not about why the buyer should buy that, what's in it for them. And I think a key book for me was our head of sales, which was one of the first people I brought in, told me to read Simon Sinek's Start With Why. And that was an incredible book for anyone to read to understand the power of the message in marketing. So investing in marketing is great, but you have to have the right message. And if you get a compelling message and you get the why behind it, and then you can do really well. And guess what? Most people don't. So if you do it right, then you've already got a head start on all these other people that just have a website for the product features.
I think one of the also benefits of writing as a founder, that I'd be curious to know if you feel is what happens when you write as a write as a founder, is that you get to I guess formulate your opinion around the topic and get that out into the world, because you're probably going to be wanting to do performance management in a specific way because that's how you want to do it. Whilst we also see that not even the companies that we work with, but just a lot of companies out there, software companies, kind of don't really have a stance on how they want to do things or how they believe the world should work, which I think gets in the way. And if you're going to do that later, it's kind of to your detriment.
That's probably another mistake that founders make, and there's a really good reason why people don't want to do that, which is an easy trap to fall into, is that you don't want to cut off any potential leads. So you don't want to kind of say, well, this would put off this particular market. So I think a lot of early stage founders want to be all things to all people, and it's really easy to kind of fall into that trap. And it's a very compelling one, because why do you want to kind of cut off a particular market that might make you loads of money? And I think in the early days it is tricky because you don't quite know where your product market fit is going to be. You don't know if it's going to be large, medium, or small companies. So you do have to start off a little bit wider in your appeal. However, I think it is really important to differentiate yourself and then have a particular stance on the way that you do things. And that might appeal more to some businesses or people than others. But I think you have to kind of do that. Otherwise, you do fall into just, yes, you're another company, and the people that are more established, people will just look at their marketing or their product and go with that. So I think certainly when we had Clear Review, to put an example on it, at the time, everyone was doing performance management software. It was all about appraisals. And I'd worked enough in performance management to know that appraisals in themselves didn't work, yet they were used for a number of reasons like performance related pay. So we just took a risk on taking a stance and say, we're actually anti-appraisals. They don't work. Why is everyone really doing performance management? What they want to get out of it is people to perform better and to develop better as people. You can't do that through a once-a-year appraisal. You wouldn't have an athlete that only gets a coaching session once a year. You have to do it regularly. So we put all our effort on about regular, meaningful conversations. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't then do a roundup once a year kind of review if you've got to do that performance related pay purposes. But I think to set yourself aside, you have to have a strong voice. So we just said, move away from annual appraisals. And you probably remember we had the bags saying, I'm so over annual appraisals. And that was quite risky because it might think, well, people who want to do annual appraisals, you're cutting off all those people. But actually, it didn't. And we ended up having a lot of customers that still did a kind of annual appraisal using our software, but the focus was all around the conversations. So, and I don't think that really was any more meaningful for enterprise than it was for mid-market or small market. We didn't cut off any sector from that. We just had a clear voice and a clear direction that people at least listened to. And when you go to a trade show or you get the emails coming through and you've got one that's a bit controversial and stands out, at least it gets your attention.
I think the thing that worked so well about that particular line and that particular stance that we took was that it doesn't alienate the audience. It's actually aspirational for quite a lot of the audience. So it's sort of like, we know that there are more forward-thinking organizations that that have ditched annual appraisals in this example, and therefore this resonates with them. But we also know that a lot of HR people, that's a big pain for them. And that's a lot of, where the difficulties lie in their job. So actually, yeah, it just becomes this aspirational thing. We talked about it before because it was one of a big governmental department, I won't say which one, that pinned the bag to the wall. Stuart, do you remember?
Oh, yeah,
And it
yeah,
became like
yeah.
a shrine.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think the aspirational thing is a good point, because again, I think people worry about taking a strong stance and being a bit controversial, because there's always, the majority of the market is probably the majority of buyers are probably slightly more conservative and a bit, they're not so forward thinking, and the earlier kind of adopters of those things. But those people are never going to buy from you anyway at the earlier stage. So at the earlier stage, the people who are going to buy for you are the early adopters looking to do something different. The people who want to play it safe will play it safe with the existing company that's been around for years. So you're not risking losing those buyers because they're never buying from you at that point anyway. So early on, you can be quite controversial, take a stance, and you'll get those early adopters, people that are willing to take risks because they'll like that approach. And then when you've got enough of those, and certainly what we did at Clear Review, we go to the people who are a bit more traditional and say, look, all these other people that have been appraisers are doing it this way. Maybe you should do it too. And they're thinking, oh God, yeah, God, am I doing something? I didn't realize I was supposed to be doing this too. And then they came on board later. So I don't think you're taking any particular risk going in with a stance early, even though it does feel like a bit of a risk.
And yeah, it's just knowing about where you are on the technology adoption curve, right? Like if you're coming out with something brand new and exciting, then you're going to have to deal with all of those visionaries and early adopters. And then, as we did, like we kind of evolved by using the proof from those early visionaries and early adopters to be like, hey, this actually works, and here's a bunch of people doing it. Like,
Yeah.
why don't you try it out? And I think it worked really well from at least what I can remember.
Yeah, well, I think those later adopters, that it's not even about the stance that you're taking. It's actually about evidence that whatever you're doing has worked and is used by enough people. So if you can show that, and you've got case studies and evidence and research to show what you're doing works, that's what they want to see.
Yeah. One of the effects of working with a CEO that gets it is that you're often let to just get on with your work, and I feel like there's a slight downside that can happen to that, which is where you don't get enough support potentially, but you struck a really great balance between letting us get on with our work, but always being there for us if we needed your support, or like also actively checking in and making sure we're okay. I believe, I don't know if it's you that told me the story or someone else at Clearview, but I believe you went through a learning and development experience yourself when it came to trusting your teams and being able to let people get on with their jobs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, in my previous company, I think I did a lot of learning in my previous company that I had, and they always say that any successful founder doesn't do it first time. You need one or two failures under your belt, and I certainly had that. I wouldn't say failure. My consulting company and outsourcing company was pretty good. I mean, it wasn't a global multi-million-pound business, but it was still pretty good. But I made a ton of mistakes that I learned from, and one of them was thinking that I could do everything. So I was, and thinking I could do everything almost better than anyone else. So you hire people, and then you're not fully trusting them to get on with it, because you're not quite sure if they're going to be as good as you. And it sounds a kind of arrogant thing to be, and I don't hopefully feel like I'm an arrogant person, but I think if you're the kind of person that has enough confidence to do a startup, leave your job and do a startup, you've got to have a lot of kind of almost naive self-confidence. So I think that can translate into work, and you end up thinking you're best at every kind of function. So you bring in people to kind of work under you, under your direction. And then, of course, what then happens is that if the business gets bigger, as it does, and you keep doing that mindset, you burn out. And I did. And I ended up having chronic fatigue syndrome after getting ill with a virus for a couple of years. I was still able to work, but I was really affected by it. It was like having flu every other day, mild flu. So it's really tricky. So when I started Clear Review, I was really adamant that I was going to take a different approach to it. And selfishly, I didn't want to get into a situation where my health would suffer again. And I know people that had chronic fatigue that they'd get better and then relapse. So I didn't want to do that. And thankfully, I haven't. So when I started Clearview, I took a different perspective. And I think I'd also learned that some of the best people that I had encountered and worked with were a shed load better than me at what they did. So yeah, when I started Clearview, I was doing the marketing, but I knew that there was people that could do it better. So my default way of thinking was bringing in people to be better than me, that almost I could learn from and support as the CEO, rather than the CEO has to be the best at everything. Is actually recognizing you're bringing in people that are fantastic at their job to almost help you. And I think having that mindset of those people are there to help you rather than you to be in charge of them helps set up the right kind of ethos for the company. And it means that you're not working every hour of the day and you do get to see some of your family, which is a bonus.
And I think also, Stuart, like our experience of working with you was it, and I'm stealing this off Ruta's notes, by the way, but it's true, is that there was a very adult to adult relationship in a way that I personally hadn't experienced until I came to work for Clearview. It'd almost been very much, you work at organisations and it's a bit like parent child, but at Clearview it was a little bit like, and we are painting it as a utopian workplace, by the way, but it was very. Yeah, it was very adult to adult, but it was also very much like there was an atmosphere where if something went wrong, we could talk about it openly, and equally, if we had challenges, we could come to you and ask questions, and you always felt like we were able to do that. And I feel like, so therefore, I think from a cultural perspective of the organisation, you set that up quite intentionally, didn't I? Would say, I think you did.
Yeah, I mean, part of it comes from I'm a kind of a weird CEO in the fact I never wanted to be the boss. I don't have that natural thing. I want to be in charge of everyone and tell people what to do. So which sets up some of that dynamic. But at the same time, I think there is an element of trust and learning as well. So I think if any leader is honest with themselves, they know that they're not going to get it right all of the time. And then you learn from a lot of mistakes. So as long as you recognize that other people are going to do the same, even if they're expert at what they do, and you allow that into your thinking, so you're treating them like you would treat yourself, then I think it sets up that culture of it's okay to make mistakes, which then once you have that understanding that it is okay for people to make mistakes, and guess what, they'll get better because of it. And very few mistakes are so bad that it's going to ruin everything. As long as you're recognizing that that's going to take place along the way, then it enables you to have a culture where there isn't blame, there is learning, and you can allow people to come to you with their problems and you solve them together. As soon as you've got a blame culture that develops, then you don't get anywhere, because no one will tell you what the problems are, because they'll hide them from you. You end up with a business where you think everything is fine, and then as soon as you get under the scenes, you realize actually it's not. And I think what really helped us with that balance, and it was part of what we kind of taught as a company, was having really clear objectives and goals, and moving into kind of the OKR territory. So as we got quite early on, when we got to a certain size, we implemented OKRs. I think that's really key, because what you're doing with OKRs is it forces you to take the right balance as a leader. What you're doing is setting out the overall targets and vision that you need to achieve. So for marketing, we know as a business, if we want to grow this much, we need marketing to develop this many leads, because we know that sales on average are going to convert 1 in 5 sales qualified leads. So we can work it back and say, this is how many leads we need. Let's work together to work out how much investment that's going to cost, and how much headcount we need to do that. Okay. And then go away and get on with that. But we'll be present and input into that too. And we'll have regular chats along the way. And where it's not working, where we're going off target, let's understand why that's going off target rather than blaming, because blaming is not going to get back on target. We need to understand what the problem is. Is it something with our messaging? You can only really do that by talking it through and kind of putting enough time as a leader into it. And I think that's an important balance to make. You need to be hands-off enough that you can give people your creative freedom to say, this is the target you need to achieve, but you can come up with the ideas on how you achieve that. But you also need to be hands-on enough to give people the time to check in regularly and take part in marketing. And I think a lot of leaders often just have it referred to me as like helicopter management, where you're kind of flown off and you lead them to it and you come back and then the rotor blades like set all hell loose because you come back and say, well, this isn't working, and then fly off again. That's not the way to do it either. I think you've got to be quite hands-on and involved, but without trying to be too controlling. So it's a fine balance to strike, but OKRs help you strike that balance.
Yeah, no more. We have referred to it in a previous episode as swoop and poop. And lots of people listening, Stuart. So we have quite a lot of marketers, understandably, who listen to the podcast, and leaders, and lots of people will be listening to this going, oh wow, that sounds amazing. I really wish my senior leadership team would sort of treat me like that. Is there anything sort of specifically that you think leaders can do to better support marketing? And I'd also say, is there anything that marketing could ask for from their leaders that would actually help, do you think, in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, I can always come in and coach the leaders on how to do that, but no, I'm not selling myself here. So what can you do? Okay, I think a really important thing for marketing to do, and all marketers have the ability to do this, is be as numbers focused as you can be. And you guys were very numbers focused, which was really good. And we had to be, because we're a VC backed company and VC love numbers. So it means they need the numbers. I needed the numbers as CEO. But what it does give you is the ability to demonstrate your worth. Because what happens in a typical company is when sales come in, sales get the pat on the back. It wasn't that great that sales did that, but sales are there to convert leads, and leads come from marketing. That's the way I view it. So a simple thing that can happen if you're doing marketing is making sure that you've got where the lead came from tracked right from marketing stages through to sales. It does take a bit of kind of technical stuff to make sure that that's being tracked. But if you can say that every lead that was sales qualified and then got converted, we know where that came from, that enables marketing to say, look, this is a campaign that we did off our own bat. This is our idea. We had this campaign around this idea. We did these 5 things. And guess what? It generated those last 5 deals that came in. Or we organized this event, or we took a punt and said, we're going to invest in this event. And guess what? That generated these leads. So if you can show the senior, the board, or the CEO, the value that you're providing in terms of actual sales and bottom line impact, it's hugely powerful. And I think a lot of people don't do that because they haven't set up their kind of processes in the way to do that. So you end up kind of relying on kind of trust and faith. Look, we did this really lovely looking campaign, I'm sure it did a good job, do you agree? And that's not really going to kind of go well with leaders who have got people breathing down their neck that want numbers. So that would be my biggest advice.
Yeah, I actually remember we had a conversation once, Stuart, when we were talking about the advocacy program, and it stands out to me because it was not the first time I've ever had a metrics data conversation with someone, but you said to me very clearly, you were like, this advocacy program's brilliant. It's really good. We can feel the love. It's great. But what is the impact that it's actually happening? And it lit a fire under my arse to then go back to Ruta and be like, right, Ruta, we need to prove this thing works and get at that data. And it was really good because it was an honest conversation, which most people would have gone, I'm sure a lot of people would hear that and go, oh my God, I've got no way of knowing. But we just developed a method of getting at that information. So I know sometimes it's hard for marketers listening, but it is doable. But you do have to have the right support around you, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. But I think once you have got that proof to the leader of how marketing is important, it's easy if you've got a leader that already has done it before and knows that marketing is important. But if you haven't, getting that evidence to show, and even if it's early stages in the business, if you've got evidence from a previous job or other comparable companies to show how they've used marketing and got any stats, even better. And I think then once you do have that buy-in from the CEO or from the leader, I think that's not enough to have truly great kind of marketing-led company. You've got to then ask that leader to ask the other functions to give marketing their time too. Because if we think about how marketing was successful in Clear Review, it was the cross-functional campaigns that we did, white papers, videos that involved stories from customer success, case studies. They're so vitally important. You'd only get those if customer success are working with their customers in the right way to nurture relationships and people that they think are going to be okay to do those case studies Product need to be on board because they need to be thinking about what product features are coming up, planning with marketing early on to like how can we start nurturing campaigns so when that product's ready to launch or that feature's ready to launch, we've got already people excited around that, even down to engineering around, if there's stuff in the news about security features or lack of security causing breaches, what are we doing about that? So I think as a leader, you can support marketing and every function actually, by encouraging cross-functional collaboration. And that might sound, you can't just say, oh, you need to be talking more. What we did at Clearview, which was really good, if you remember when we got to a certain size, we found that collaboration wasn't happening organically. So we got everyone to put in the diary, every function would have a 2-week catch up with another function just to talk about what's going on. And I think that was absolutely key. People tend to focus one-on-ones or team meets within their own team, but having cross-functional ones with no particular agenda other than knowing what's going on in each other's departments, I think was really critical.
I think also one other thing I learned, and you might still remember the numbers for this, but like this is good advice for anyone working anywhere in any function. Most people don't do the things they said they will do by the time they said they will do it. So just doing stuff on time is going to be great. So if you're a marketing team that's struggling with credit, just say you're going to do stuff, make sure you do it on time, and make sure the person you said it to knows that you did it. Which, stupid advice, very basic, I guess, but
basic but incredibly powerful. I think the certainly the number I was always told was only 20% of people do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do that. So that was one of the things I tried to instill in the whole business. I think it was one of our values, wasn't it? So if you do that, then you're better than 80% of people. And if you run your company like that, you'll be better than 80% of companies, because we all get used to that. You deal with a service company, electricity provider, or whoever it is, and they say they're going to do something, and most of the time it just doesn't happen, does it? So it's always quite a shock when someone says, oh, they said they get to me on Friday, and guess what? Got it on Friday. Thursday even better, but actually Friday's fine. You know what I mean? It's quite impressive. So you can definitely get credibility by being the team that actually gets stuff done on time, and that involves some corralling of people. And you guys were very good at that because you were very you treat everything like proper project management. So there'd be schedule. If you've got marketing output that has to happen here, let's schedule that right back. What interventions have to happen at each stage, and you guys were doing that and making sure that you're corralling me into getting time in my diary quite a long way ahead, which I think is really important as well. If marketing is recognizing that people are really busy, so if they're going to give you time, just booking it 6 weeks ahead, or 4 weeks ahead. I think that's something that can be done, and that will help you do things on time and without annoying people too much, because everyone's got their own job to do as well.
Yeah, and proper briefing people as well. Because I think that's one of the things that's really frustrating when you're not involved in the marketing department day to day, but then somebody comes to you and asks you to be on a webinar. If you don't know what that webinar's about, or you don't have a clue who's involved, all the rest of it, like you say, Stuart, or you don't have an oversight of the schedule, then that must be incredibly frustrating, because it's a bit like, well, what all of a sudden, what are the expectations of me? And that puts the backup, that could put you back up, like no matter who you are, you might be a really well-versed speaker, but that's going to annoy the shit out of you if all of a sudden somebody's dropped a webinar planning session in your diary the day before you need to plan.
Yeah, nightmare. And also, I think if people don't understand why you're doing it and the importance of it as well, we talked about that start with why earlier on, but I think that is really important even internally. If you can explain to people why you're doing something and the importance of that, and then people say, oh God, I totally see why that's important, I'm happy to help, rather than I need you to speak on this webinar. I think it makes a huge difference. And I think, again, we talked about those cross-functional meetings that you have. It gives you the time to help people understand what you're doing and why. I also think, when we did the OKRs, we always did a kind of quarterly OKR launch where each company, each part of the company would be talking about their objectives and key results they were doing for the quarter, so everybody understands, what's at stake here. So when you're asking them to do that webinar, they say, okay, yeah, because I know you've got some massive targets to hit here, I can see. But then sales don't mind because they know that that's going to generate leads for them. So
On the theme of the kind of getting shit done stuff, the other thing that we used to do post actually getting the stuff done was proactively ask each other for feedback. Obviously, we work for a performance management company, so it's slightly easier for us to have done that. So yeah, we obviously naturally ask for feedback, but there are ways that people can make sure they do that even if you don't have a performance management software. Because what was the importance of that, Stuart, from your perspective, like us being proactive about asking for feedback?
The importance of that is, it comes back to this ethos of recognizing that failure is a kind of an important part of success. And someone actually described it to me really well, is that failure, you've got to view it as a tax on success. So you can't be good at anything without getting stuff wrong along the way. Nobody can do that, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a business person, whether you're a musician. You're going to make a load of mistakes. And the quicker that you learn from those mistakes, the quicker you get to the stage where you're amazing at something. So if we all recognize that that's the process that everyone has to go through, then you want that to happen really fast. So the quickest way of doing it is everything that you do, if you ask for feedback on how you did, you'll get some learnings from that. But if you don't ask for it, people are too polite to give it to you unless it went really badly. But most of the time, the stuff doesn't go really badly. It's sometimes things just go okay, but there will be massive opportunities to do it better. So it's that thing of, if we all get into this habit of asking for feedback on what we've done, we'll all be better quickly. And I think that was really powerful. And I think we got to the stage in the company where I think everyone was probably, at the top of their game, as close to it as they could be. Or if people weren't that and they weren't willing to take that kind of feedback approach, then we had a couple of examples where people just didn't stay very long, and we never had to kind of particularly do anything about that. You kind of self-select and say, you know what, I'm not right here, I'm not comfortable with this kind of level of progression. So I think that asking for feedback was key for that reason, but it's really hard to do. I hate asking for feedback. I did it reluctantly, but I absolutely hated it because it's easy to take it kind of personally, but you just got to keep reminding myself that's the only way of getting better and learning, is by asking for feedback on how I've done, and importantly, what could I do better. And feedback can be made easier if you phrase it in the right way. And I think what we used to do was, every time there was a piece of feedback through the software, we'd say, what went well, what could I do even better next time? It's a kind of an easier way of doing that, rather than what could I get better at. Kind of lands easier, doesn't it?
Also doing it like asynchronously, so asking via email or via software or Slack, and having the person think about it is much better than like just bopping up and being like, Stuart, give me feedback about blah blah, because you're like, ugh, I haven't thought about it, I don't want to offend you.
And it's hard in person as well. It's easier to give. We did some research, didn't it, about feedback. I remember that it's easier to give difficult feedback, in writing than it is, or it's easier to accept it in writing than it is verbally. So I think people are often worried about putting it electronically, that it's not the right way to give feedback. But I think actually, if it's really difficult feedback, then obviously a conversation has to have. But if it's that kind of, most feedback is, this could be done better, or you could do that even better by doing this, that's kind of okay to receive.
Is there anything that we experienced together as a team, or that we should have asked you about, CEOs that get marketing and that can support marketing, that we didn't ask you about?
I think there was one other thing that I was thinking about, the importance of marketing. It kind of goes back to that thing of, I talked about with getting marketing spun up really early on. And I guess it's on that subject of failure in the company, the second company I had, the one before Clear Review. It actually didn't work as a business because we realized that it wasn't kind of economically viable in terms of how many leads we were able to bring in for a certain cost and how much we could charge for the product. It was a great idea, but it just wasn't kind of scalable. And the only way we'd have known that was by doing good marketing earlier on. So we did invest in marketing in the same way as I did with Clear Review. When we were building the product, we got the kind of website going. So by the time we were ready to launch, we had some leads coming in, and we needed how to bolster that with pay-per-click. But only when you've got that consistent flow of leads do you know whether you've got product market fit, and do you know how many you can convert. So and I think it was the case with ours, if you're only converting like 1 in 20, it's not enough. The kind of rule of thumb of, qualified leads, you need to be converting about 1 in 5. So you can kind of tweak the marketing. Maybe we're selling wrong, but you can only make that decision if you've got a decent number of leads. If you don't have enough leads, and I see this quite a lot, you're kind of you kind of don't know where to take your business in that early stage. You don't know what's broken. Is it just that your messaging is not quite right, or is it the product needs to be tweaked? And I think people make the mistake of like, oh, I just need to pivot the product. I need to pivot the product. Sometimes you need to think, well, actually, you know what? We just need to shut up shop and do something else because it was a great idea that for some reason it's just not economically viable. So I think investing in marketing early on is good for both those reasons. On the positive side, if it works, great, because you're getting that momentum quicker, but it enables you to fail fast. And if it's something that you shouldn't be doing, you know that quicker. So that was kind of the last thing that I kind of thought of from my own experience. Let's end on a negative.
We can put it into the middle somewhere. No, it's fine. I've certainly felt that way. And sussing out even business models, like I really don't enjoy marketplaces because I don't want to deal with having to do work for both audiences of sellers and buyers. So like, but I wouldn't know that unless I tried to make a marketplace for something. So yeah, totally agreed. Well, Stuart, it's been so lovely having you on. It feels like no time has passed at all.
I know, lovely to see you guys again. And really enjoyed talking about marketing. It's one of my favorite subjects, and all CEOs should be loving marketing because if you get it right, then it's brilliant for everyone because business flies and everyone's happy.
This is the last episode of the season, so we will be back in about a month's time, so keep your eye out. And apologies for my slightly crappy sound because I forgot my microphone. So yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and hopefully we'll see you on blameitoonmarketing.com.